Gurgaon who made that 370 rupee biryani comment has been sacked from his job. And the big debate on the internet today is whether or not he deserved to be fired for what he said and if that in fact was fair. That's the question we're going to attempt to answer in this video. Let me first give you a quick understanding of what we're talking about if you don't already know the controversy. There was an individual called Himanshu Jhangra who works for a design company in Gurgaon, attending a stand-up comedy show by Pranit More, who's the comedian in question. And during this conversation, Pranit More has shows in which he offers cash to his audience members to tell personal stories. This was one of those personal stories that Himanshu told, in which he recounted a date on which he went with this woman and spent 370 rupees. And then he felt entitled to sexual intimacy to sort of vasuli that paisa, to get value for money, for the money that he had spent. And I thought that that was the portion of the show, that went viral, and that's the portion that I had seen. But then when we started to do the research on the matter, we saw that there was a lot more to it. And there are some clips fully available still on Reddit and on YouTube, where these two individuals carry on even further. And I say two individuals because I believe Pranit More is as responsible for what happened as Himanshu. Himanshu goes on to tell the story about how he took this girl to a very dark park outside of her home. They were sitting in the park together. He pretended to be interested in what she was saying. And he attempted to kiss her when she said that I want to be friends and I don't want to do anything. He sort of pretended to be sad so that he could coax her into physical intimacy. And then he goes on to graphically describe where he touched her, how he touched her, how he put her hands in her clothes, and he actually acts it out with a fellow audience member. Through all of this, Pranit More is encouraging him, clapping for him, getting the audience to clap for him, kept bringing up the trope of this whole story, saying, oh, to paise to vasool karne honge na. And then they go on to say how the next week he invited her back to his own home. He arranged for the condoms. She said she didn't feel like doing anything, but he somehow coaxed her into physical intimacy again. Again, Pranit More encouraging the audience to clap for this story, and then he went on to give him a large amount of money, saying it was so good, he's so impressed. Pranit More has since then put out an apology. He is an extremely popular Maharashtrian stand-up comedian, content creator, former radio jockey. He has a considerable following on social media and on YouTube, and he's fairly recognized. He was also in Big Boss 19. He has apologized. Now I want you to take a look at his apology, right? He said, it was a lapse of judgment on my part. I should have challenged the remark instead of laughing and moving on. It was not a remark. It was a long length story. You didn't just laugh and move on, Pranit. You actually encouraged it and you participated in it. And that's a really important angle. He said, live crowd work often involves reacting in real time, and that's not an excuse. It's certainly not an excuse. And I believe in this case, live crowd work has actually betrayed Pranit More, and his real values or the lack of them have become actually apparent. He says, I take feedback seriously and I'll be more thoughtful. In fact, I think he needs to take more responsibility for what has happened. Now, the company that Himanshu Jhangra works for is called Stavik Design. The founder, Vivek Vishwakarma, put out a statement on Instagram in which he said that the company has decided to part ways. He said, we spoke to other team members who described Himanshu as professional, respectful, hardworking and well-behaved. Nevertheless, we've decided to part ways because we found the statements to be offensive and they are not something that I agree with. And the employer added that the incident had taken place outside of the office premises, but its impact is being felt by the company as well. So then let's come to our central question, right? Was it fair and justified for Himanshu to have been sacked from his job? Now, if I were to examine it, one, he has publicly admitted to conduct that appears to disrespect consent, non-consensual conduct, where he has said that he kissed and touched a woman after she had refused. And the law is very clear about that. Now, an employer could read this as poor judgment, as lack of judgment, as lack of values. And in many workplaces, this is not something you want in your workspace. Now, companies also have a right to protect their reputation and to protect their team members. And so if you feel for some reason that there is an individual in your team who's being accused of or suspected of sexual misconduct, the company can decide to remove this individual for the protection of the other team members. You're fully within your rights to do so. And then also trust matters, right? If you don't, is this the type of person you want to trust with judgment, with with making decisions at the workplace, if the person has such poor values, such little respect for women and for consent. And then the big argument is this, and that's freedom of speech. Now, a lot of free speechers, I'm a free speaker myself, and I say that you have the right to say what's on your mind, but that doesn't mean you don't accept the consequences of what you have done and what you have said. In this case, you do have a right to speak freely and to make jokes, and people could say this was just a joke. But in that same run, an employer has a right to decide who they want in their teams, who they want in their offices, what sort of company values actually they want to reflect, and how they want to actually enforce those company values. So the counter argument can obviously be that there's been no investigation, there's no complaint, there's no proof, that this is just internet justice, and the internet is baying for someone's head because we've all gotten collectively offended. But at the same time, in this particular case, this is an employer deciding that you have a team member who has shown complete disregard for consent. You have a team member who has shown that he has no respect for bodily autonomy of women, who believe that he is entitled to sexual intimacy, that there is a price tag to that sexual intimacy, and because he spent 300 rupees on biryani, that he's entitled. It displays a inflated sense of self and an inflated sense of entitlement. And fundamentally, in this case, I think that if you're old enough to earn a salary, if you're old enough to work in a job, then you are also old enough, and you should know that buying someone dinner doesn't entitle you to their body, that you are also in this. I mean, this individual is comfortable describing what he has done in a public forum that he knows is going to go up on the internet, which means that he feels no remorse at all for what he has done. So there are many parts of this video that I believe show us what is wrong with our society. From this young man's point of view, he has a very transactional view about women. He thinks that, okay, I spent some money, so I'm entitled to something back. He's constantly pushing the boundaries in his story. Every time she says no, he finds a way to make her do what he wants to do. When she says she wants to be friends, he performs sadness so that she changes her mind. If she says she's not in the mood, he continues physical escalation until she gives in. The story is entirely told from his perspective. He has no empathy at all for her feelings, for her comfort, for what she's saying to him. It's all about his disappointment, his frustration, what he feels he wants, the fact that he has desires, the fact that he is heated, charged, turned down, as he says. There's a complete absence of her point of view. And that displays, for me, a huge problem of what is wrong with our society. For Pranit More, who was on the stage holding the mic, had the ability to shut this down, and he didn't do so. His encouragement to laugh at this, to clap for it, to cheer it on, actually shows that he was saying this is normal, this is good, this is admirable, this is success. And that group reinforcement in the whole room, where people were clapping, people were enjoying it. There were some women in the group as well. And I think that all of it shows that we have a much deeper issue in our society than what was in that room. If you ask me what that deeper issue is, for me, it's the idea of pleasure. And bear with me for a second. There is this idea that pleasure is something only men can have. They want the pleasure, and they have to in some way coax it out of a woman. Maybe by buying her dinner, maybe by pretending to be sad, maybe by pushing even after she says no. And pleasure is never something that men like Himanshu think women should have. He's not considered her pleasure at all. He considers her some sort of locker in which his pleasure is stored, and he has to find some way to access that pleasure from that locker, by consent or otherwise. And that's his achievement. His achievement is unlocking that pleasure and gaining some pleasure for himself. And he is the type of man who will go out and tell his friends about it, and in this case, the whole world via the internet. He has no idea at all that an act of intimacy has to be pleasurable for both parties. This is exactly the kind of idea that leads to sexual harassment. This is exactly the kind of idea that eventually leads to rape, domestic rape. The idea that men have to take from women and women have to give in some way. So even in this video, he says, "Wo deti nahi hai, main leti nahi hu." You know, the language of it is deeply disturbing. I mean, we just recently got out of this whole thing where we were talking about dowry. Another transactional relationship where men believe and families believe that a woman is part of a transaction. That if enough money changes hands, a woman goes from one house to another house. That a woman is at the mercy of what your values are or the lack of them. That she has no real say of her own. That when she says no, she actually means yes. When she wants to turn away, she actually wants you to chase her. This is where our society is deeply problematic. Let's be honest about men like Himanshu. If it weren't for the arranged marriage system, men like him would never find wives. They would never, and in my opinion, should not be allowed to procreate at all. These ideas should die out. They should not be allowed to be passed on. Because when men like Himanshu, through the arranged marriage system, find themselves wives, that is when you have a dowry problem. That is when you have an abuse problem. That is when you will have a domestic rape problem. Because they obviously do not understand that women are individuals, they are human beings. They have feelings, desires just like you. It's an idea that's completely lost on him. And we could argue that this is some individual plucked out of obscurity in Haryana, but what do we say about Pranit More? And the fact that he has been granted this massive platform on the internet, that his ideas are actually coaching younger people, younger men to think and believe the same. That really poorly worded apology simply does not do Pranit More. You have to be more responsible for the ideas that you put out and that you stand for. And I would really recommend some education. Go learn something, read a book. It might be handy. Deeply problematic young men. And they wonder why nobody wants to date them anymore. Why nobody wants to marry them anymore. Why there is a male loneliness epidemic. You haven't earned the respect of company. Do I think it was right for him to be sacked? Well, I believe the employer was fully within their rights to make that decision. What do you think?